Welcome to the episode of the Stems of Grad School podcast. Today, I am very excited to have Dr. Brinnae Bent, who recently defended her PhD at Duke University, and next month will be joining Edge Analytics as a data scientist. So I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Elena. It's really awesome to be here and to be a part of the podcast. I'm excited for today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. To start out, do you want to just kind of share what your kind of current position is and maybe a little tidbit about what your next position is because you're kind of in a transition, and then maybe just some of the highlights for how you got to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. So right now I'm finishing up just a few things at Duke this month, and next month I'm going to be starting my career as a data scientist, like you said, at Edge Analytics, which is a data science consulting company. And I'm going to be doing research in a variety of different domains and solving lots of cool problems. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also going to be staying lead developer of the digital biomarker discovery pipeline, which is an open source software resource that I developed during my PhD to make digital health data science more accessible. So having my hands in multiple things this year, but it's pretty exciting. In terms of my career, kind of path, I started my research career at North Carolina State University, where I did my undergraduate. And there I worked at an NSF Assist Center, and I did work in a research lab that focused on actually developing the hardware behind wearables for both asthma monitoring and for sleep disorder monitoring. So really awesome projects to work on. And then I came to Duke for my master's, where I focused more in neural engineering, and I worked on a closed loop feedback system for spinal cord stimulation, which was really an interesting project. And both of those kind of converged into my PhD, where I was more on the software side of things, but I developed digital biomarkers of glycemic health from non-invasive wearables. So looking at ways where we can detect risk for prediabetes and do non-invasive glucose monitoring using something simple like your smartwatch.
Yeah.
So that's what I was working on during my PhD.
That is incredibly interesting.
It was a really, really fun PhD to work on. And I think every research experience that I've had has just been really fascinating. And there's been so many different interesting things to explore, which is why I'm excited about my consulting role, because I'll be able to work on a variety of different projects and use my very diverse skill set to do a lot of, different things. So yeah, I think I've had an interesting research trajectory and hopefully more interesting things to come.
Yeah, I actually did my postdoc at East Carolina University.
Oh, really? Oh, that's awesome.
So it's like we collaborated with North Carolina State University a lot too. So like I've been around are you staying in Carolina for your next job?
Yeah, so everything's remote right now. So it's kind of,
makes sense.
Everything is up in the air at the moment, but they're actually located in the Bay Area. So the company.
Oh, so like San Francisco?
Yeah, so like the Palo Alto to San Francisco area. Yeah.
Okay.
So
well, that's a nice area to live in too.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful area there. It's beautiful here in North Carolina. So I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, that's always a good situation to not hate if you have to move somewhere else too.
Exactly.
So today's topic is going to be on personal branding for graduate students. So to start out talking about this, why should graduate students care about or even start thinking about developing their own personal brand?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I think, as graduate students, sometimes we get so caught up with our work that we kind of forget that there's this whole world beyond, our small research bubble. So I think graduate students should think about personal branding, and I have 3 reasons for it. So number one, communicating your science is a really important component to doing research in general, right? Whether that's in academia or whether that's in industry, science communication is really important. By thinking about personal branding and how you want to communicate your research, you're going to be practicing your science communication. So that's point one. You get to practice your science communication. Number two is to network. So by focusing on personal branding, you will be able to connect with other awesome people. And by building your network, you are increasing the reach of your research. And you're also making meaningful connections with people that you may end up collaborating with or even
Yeah.
working with down the road. So I think that is huge, number two. And then the last one, number three, is that online presence can help you get a job. So a lot of PhD positions and postdoc opportunities are posted directly on Twitter. In my
Hmm.
network, I probably see like 10 or so tweets every week with like PhD position here, or postdoc position here. And so you are already building this network and you could get a job out of it. And then in terms of industry jobs, if you're more interested in that, a lot of industry jobs are posted on LinkedIn. So if you
Hmm.
are active on LinkedIn, you're more likely to see some job postings there or be, even recruited through LinkedIn. So I think those 3 points are reasons to do this personal branding as a graduate student. And personally, I've found that personal branding has helped me expand my network immensely. I have had, the opportunity to work on a number of cool projects that I wouldn't have even known about if not for this network that I've kind of been cultivating throughout the latter half of my PhD. So the experience gained in science communication from blogging data science and machine learning tutorials, it's actually helped inform some of my research presentations and the way that I communicate about these topics to different kinds of audiences. And by sharing my research and papers and articles with my network, I found that this actually expands the reach of my research. So more
Right.
people are using it and citing it, which is awesome. It's always so cool to see like somebody who reaches out to me and they're like, hey, I was really excited about your paper. I'm going to cite it in my paper. I'm like, that's so cool, right? Because they found it on Twitter, which is such an interesting, it sounds so weird, right? That you like can connect with people on Twitter and science.
Hmm.
But it is what it is, right? And so I think as graduate students, we should try to harness that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make because I didn't actually get on like academic Twitter, right? I didn't actually get on Twitter until I was building my business. And when you start in a business, you often, and I think this is like kind of similar to like scientists, you think about the products you're going to make. But really, the biggest keystone of your business is marketing and for people to actually learn about you. And I think when you're a scientist, it's so easy to think about, okay, the research papers. And we never, because we just want the line on our CV, right? But we never think about marketing it and how we can really market ourselves and create ourselves as a product, I guess, in a way. And the marketing aspect of that Twitter and other social media sites are so good for that you know about in business, but taking that same insight as a scientist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're all doing like such cool research, right? Like we should get it
Yeah.
out there and communicate about it to other people and also network with other incredible scientists. I think, that is a huge component. It's been so exciting to connect with so many different scientists across all kinds of fields, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm definitely like my network is, people in like more like plant stuff and in like astrophysics and like all
Mhm.
these different topics. And I think that's really cool because then my feed is just filled up with all of this interesting science from all these different domains. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it's, like, interesting to also, like, think about what other people are doing and, like, try and understand it, and I think
Mhm.
that also helps inform your own science communication when you're trying to understand other people's things and you're like, "Oh, well, if they would've just said this, that would've made it a little bit easier to understand."
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point.
So, for graduate students that are maybe interested in starting a personal brand, what do you think is really the first step for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first step is always the most difficult, right? So that's like with pretty much anything, but definitely with personal branding. So my advice is to start with very small goals. So
Okay.
try to post on Twitter once or twice a month to start out. Or if you want to start a blog, try to write one blog post a semester. By giving these small attainable goals, you're more likely to stick with it. And so that's why, to start out, start small and you can always
Mhm.
get, bigger from there. but you want to make sure that you stick with it. And so by making things attainable, it's more likely that you're going to stick with it.
Yeah, and talking about starting small, as graduate students, you're really busy already, and now you're kind of being like, well, if you want to do well outside of grad school, you might want to put this additional thing on. So, should they start doing this while trying to manage everything else that makes graduate students so busy?
Yeah, this is a great question because time is so limited. And I don't
Hmm.
know about you, but I thought, when COVID started last year, I was like, oh, nice. I'll have a little bit of extra time, right? I won't have my commute. And
Right.
so I'll have a little bit of extra time for a few months back when we thought it would only last, a month or two. Um, and I have found myself with way less time since COVID started. You kick out the commute and suddenly you have you have way less time on your hands. And so
Yeah.
busy is definitely the definition of a graduate student. But I think, like I mentioned with the first steps, I think the key is to have those small, attainable goals. So, what I do and what I recommend doing is blocking time out in your calendar in advance. So,
Okay.
let's say that you have a goal to write one blog post a semester, that's your attainable goal. And at the beginning of the semester, maybe you block out 1 hour every single week on, like, let's say Friday mornings to focus on writing that blog.
Right.
So I think that is, one key component is making sure you're setting time aside to do these things so that, if you already have it booked in your calendar, you can't, overbook yourself. And so I think that helps a lot. And then secondly, I think you should find enjoyment in doing whatever you plan to do with it, right? That's pretty key to success because if you don't like doing something, you're less likely to actually, go
Right.
about doing it. So if you hate writing blogs, don't write a blog.
Right.
Instead, maybe put an infographic together. Maybe you really like, graphic design. Put an infographic together in your research, or do a quick Twitter thread on a cool paper if you don't like, doing long, drawn out blog posts. Try to do things that are fun for you, and you're going to be more likely to squeeze in the time for it because we're all super limited on time. So by at least having a little bit of fun with it,
Yeah.
hopefully, you'll be able to prioritize it a little bit more. But small goals and having fun with it, I would say those are my two pieces of advice.
Yeah, I think those are really good pieces of advice, and I think this conversation so well matches with the content creator business type of conversation as well. And so it's so important that whatever you're doing, whatever content you're producing, that you actually enjoy what you're doing. Because if you put a bunch of work into something and then no one reads it or no one looks at it, it's gonna feel so much more crushing than if you enjoyed the whole process.
Yeah, yeah, 100% agree with that. And as graduate students, we often don't think of ourselves as content creators, but we totally
Right.
are, right? Like
Yeah.
we're creating papers, we're creating presentations, we're if we're doing any science communication or writing anything, that goes out to any audience, we are content creators. So by putting yourself in those kind of shoes and thinking about it that kind of way, I think it's a great way to think about it and to take those small bite-sized pieces of creating all of this content that makes you unique and makes your research brand, your personal brand, unique.
Yeah, I think that's a really great concept and thinking about as scientists, we are, in fact, content creators. Like, I
Mhm.
think after going through the journey of kind of entrepreneurship, starting my business and becoming a content creator, now I'm like, oh, I could have, like, there's all these things I could have done when I was like predominantly a scientist. And I'm like, that would have, made things so much better. And thinking about, how we produce research and think about it in the future. And I think a lot of times, especially for me, I would always think of like the published papers, the endpoint of that research, right? And thinking, but then when you think about like a lot of the good, what is it, metrics, I guess, are based on like citations. And so it's the whole like publish and hope, or publish and wait. And that you, okay, you got this thing published and now you hope that people happen to find it, instead of actually learning to market it and understanding the importance of that as you as a scientist, because someone may not be researching for your papers for 2 years, but could have used you in their lab last year.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's something that I like to think about a lot because, our research is in these papers, and, how many people are actually reading these papers all the way through, right? But
Right.
think of how many more people could be connected to your research if you did, a small Twitter thread on it, or you wrote just a short blog post on it that is more accessible to a general population. More people will read it, and more people will be interested and excited about your research, which I think is really important because, we have a funding issue in science. And it's part
Right.
of that reason is because the general population, doesn't understand the importance of a lot of the things that we're working on. So by getting that out there to the general audience, I think it just kind of, helps science in general. So as stewards of science, I think we need to get our work out there. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, kind of talking about that, there are so many different ways that you can start getting your work out there. So could you kind of go through maybe some of the major platforms for graduate students to kind of start on, and then how should they kind of choose between those platforms, or what platforms are better for certain people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's so many to choose from, and my recommendation is to actually start with your personal website. And it can be
Okay.
super basic, right? With just like your name and contact information and maybe a few bullet points about your research. But what that does is it kind of establishes your online presence. And this is the place that you yourself control on the internet to get your brand across. And then you can link it from all of the other platforms that you're on. But I think starting with that can kind of center yourself and make you think about, like, what do I want my brand to be?
Mm-hmm.
And, how do I want to present myself to, the general population, to other researchers, to other scientists? And then in terms of like all of the different platforms, because there's so many,
Well,
right?
can we wait 1 second?
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm
sorry.
gonna pause for a second. So you said start with an on your own website.
Mhm.
So how do they go about doing that? How do you, because like that sounds like so easy. Like just create a website. But like from my own experiences, there are so many ways to make a website, and even like your domain name, should you just go get like a WordPress, like just something, ElenaReister.wordpress.org, and like how would you go about doing that, or
Yeah,
suggest?
that's a great question. And so I'd probably start with something free, right,
Okay.
as you're learning the ropes. And so there, if you're interested in like a drag and drop, there's like Wix and Weebly, they have free options. It'll be like Weebly dot, let's say Brinnae.com, right?
Okay.
But what it's doing is getting you started, and then you can decide what you want from there. I've tried so many, I tried all of them, and I actually ended up like building my own website um, because I didn't like anything that was out there, but I went through and tried like every single thing, right?
Yeah.
But before you connect, like a specific domain that you might want, just try it. Just
Okay.
see what you like, and I think that's the most important thing. If you're interested in doing like a little bit of coding, for the computer scientists, the statisticians, anybody who works with programming anyway, HTML is super easy to use. There's a bunch of
Hmm.
templates that you basically, change your name, change your picture, and, like you can change some colors around. So I would recommend doing that. And you can actually host it for free on GitHub Pages. And they do
Okay.
all of the security for you. It's, all really easy, all backed up through Git. And the entire process is super seamless. And the websites are really fast. And so if you pay for a website and go through all of that process, you're going to have to pay a lot of money to get it as fast as GitHub Pages is. So
Okay.
whenever people are like, I don't know where to start with a website, I'm like, go to GitHub Pages, because you can download, templates and get it up there on GitHub Pages and have like a really beautiful website that you can change as much as you want. It's super easy to use. So I love using GitHub pages, and I think it's super helpful, especially if you don't want to have to figure out, all of this like your crazy stuff with like figuring out the domain and where things
Hmm.
connect to and all of this stuff on the back end. It kind of does all of that for you, and everything is pretty easy. So, and they have
Yeah.
a ton of tutorials as well. So if you aren't
Okay.
sure what to do, you can follow along with some tutorials, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, and if you're watching, we'll have that link linked below in the description. The second question I have, kind of based on like starting your website, is when you're in your domain name, what do you choose for that? Like, is it first and last? Is it, what how would you set, or what are your recommendations for that?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I think, it kind of goes back to that point of thinking about what you want your personal brand to be. So for me, my website is runsdata.org. And that's also my
Okay.
handle on Twitter, my handle on Instagram, GitHub, like everything that
Hmm.
could possibly be. I've like branded it all, the same. And runs data is something that, so I'm a data scientist, and then I
Hmm.
also am an ultra runner. So I kind of combine those two things, like a very personal thing, but then a very, like
Right.
a research, professional thing. And I kind of like smush them together into this domain that actually, has been kind of part of my personal brand is like, yes, it's
Right.
this combination of what I do, for my job, what I do for fun. And actually, how I got started in data science in the very beginning was analyzing my own running data. So there's like a
Wow.
history behind it too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can totally go that way, right? But for a lot of people, they just want to go with their name, which is totally fine. And I would probably recommend first and last name. Occasionally, if you don't want to use your last name or you're thinking about potentially changing it, right? Like you might want to get married and change your last name, then you could
Hmm.
do like your first and middle name. You could also, if you are like a postdoc, you could do like, doctor and then your first name, or doctor and then your last
Right.
name. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in terms of domain and what makes the most sense for you personally. So there's a lot of options. And I think there's no right answer for that. Just make sure, it's professional and, pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and I think this is like a similar, not exactly the same, but a similar conversation that a lot of us will have when we first publish a paper. And it's like,
Mhm.
do we include our middle name? So, like, I publish all papers under Elena L. Reister. So, when I actually made my first website, I made it ElenaLReister.com. So, I think sometimes when you've had to think out that process, which I think it really depends on who you are, but there's a lot of factors that go into it. So, like, how many people have the name Elena Reister? Should I include the middle initial? And I feel like that's kind of a whole different topic. But I think it's similar in when you, especially if you've decided on like a consistent name you're going to publish under, and you want to have that as your website name. It kind of makes sense as that too, unless you want to
Mhm.
go into a more like personal brand that's not your name kind of
Yeah,
vibe.
exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now that we covered the website, let's go on to the other platforms.
Yeah, so in terms of other platforms, there's a lot out there, right? But I think the best platforms to choose are the ones you're most likely to use consistently. So
Okay.
I personally use Twitter the most consistently, but I also keep up with my LinkedIn. I blog on Medium. I use Clubhouse. And then I use Instagram, but I'm really bad at Instagram and I don't update it very often. So for me, Instagram is maybe not the best platform of choice. But all of these platforms can be used for creating and maintaining your personal brand. And I would say don't be afraid to shop around, like make
Hmm.
things, across these different platforms and see what you like to do the best, and what kind of speaks to you the most. Like if you like to think in pictures, Instagram might be the place
Hmm.
for you. If you prefer, threads on Twitter with like images and short blocks of text, then maybe Twitter is for you. And then Clubhouse is all audio. So if you're the kind of person who likes to talk, not on video, and just like get, your thoughts out there, then maybe Clubhouse is the best thing for you. But all of these have their advantages and disadvantages, and they also all have different audiences, right?
Hmm.
So I think there's a huge following, academic Twitter. There's a lot of scientists on Twitter. I think there's less so on like Instagram and TikTok, but there are still, like some people on there
Yeah.
from the academic world. So I think, it's kind of one of those things. Where are your people at that you want to connect with, and, try to jump into those circles. And that probably will involve, shopping around a little bit.
Yeah, so I kind of have a story kind of on that. So when I started my business, I had my website and I have a YouTube channel. And I like actually paid for a course to learn Instagram and to learn Instagram marketing.
Oh,
And
wow.
I absolutely hated it. Like I have an Instagram. I like work so hard and I think it has like 70 followers. And I hated every minute of it. And so I was just like, well, I'm done. Like if that's how I have to like run a business or whatever, like no, it's not happening. And then like later on, I found Twitter. And because like I don't want to spend the time making an infographic. Like I just don't
Yeah.
enjoy that. We're like I love writing, so I write on Medium as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and so I did Medium first, and then I did Twitter, and I was like, oh well, I can write. And so like what you're talking about, shopping around and trying something out, and if you're like I hate this, then don't keep doing it. Try
Right.
and find a different platform that more fits your vibe versus trying to force yourself, because I tried to force myself to do Instagram for way too long.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like if you're not, if you don't like a platform, don't keep at it. There's probably a reason you
Yeah.
don't like it. And so jump to something else. And that's totally fine, right? And it's okay to have like a presence in every place, but maybe one is, your most frequently used.
Hmm.
So I think that's fine too. So I think, don't be afraid to shop around.
Yeah, and the other one you talked about, and I actually don't know much of anything about it, but Clubhouse. So from my understanding, a Clubhouse is like hard to break into. So can you like kind of share a little bit of your experience and like how do you break into the club?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, send me an email. I have like a bunch of invites. So if
Oh,
you want
okay.
to try out Clubhouse, just, send me an email, and I just need your phone number, and then I can get you into
Okay.
Clubhouse and you can test it out for yourself. It is a very interesting platform. They're still working on their like their interface and their
Hmm.
experience and everything. But basically you can join like any chat room where it's just audio, so you don't see anybody.
Okay.
It's just audio, and you can chat about a variety of different topics. I think a lot of medical folks are on there, and a
Okay.
lot of like people in the entrepreneurial space. So like startups, a lot of startups in the digital health space around there. That's kind of how I got involved in it.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, like very interesting areas. I don't know if academic Twitter has kind of merged over into Clubhouse yet, but I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of rooms focused on different types of science. And it is definitely an interesting platform. You should try it out.
I'm
Because
interested.
because it is kind of wild. I definitely was very uncomfortable at first, like being a millennial. I don't like talking on the phone. I much
Yep.
prefer either Zoom or text me, right? Like, do not call me. I don't want to like just talk to you. So it was like very jarring at first because all you can do is hear people's voices, and then
Hmm.
you can unmute yourself, and it's like the most terrifying thing ever. But I've actually hosted a couple of panels in Clubhouse, and it's actually a really cool way to kind of bring people together from all of these different domains. So I
Okay.
hosted a panel a couple weeks ago where we were looking at wearables from, like a personal health monitoring perspective, especially around
Okay.
athletic performance. And so it was actually two people that I met on Twitter that I had joined the panel with me. So never having
Okay.
met in real life, but brought them into this panel. And so it's kind of a way to, have a more in-depth conversation than you might have on Twitter, and in front of an audience. So it's kind of like being at a conference.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting. And I think it's like kind of following in like podcasts becoming much more popular as of late. And so kind of following that trend where some people they don't necessarily like to write, but they don't want to get in front of a camera either.
Yeah.
Because that's like there's two different levels there. And so
Right.
just the audio is kind of where podcasts have fallen into. And I think that's also where Clubhouse wanted to make interactive podcast, I guess is how I think of them.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. It's like being able to listen to a podcast by like your favorite author, right? And then you can actually like get on stage and ask them a question, which is so wild, right? So
Yeah.
it's a really cool platform. And I'm really curious to hear what you think about it.
Yeah,
So you'll have to try it out and just like let
yeah.
me know what your thoughts are on it, because it's kind of a different experience from other social media platforms.
Yeah, I'll definitely send you an email and try it out because I'm
Yeah.
very interested. And I think kind of going off like the whole Clubhouse thing, because like I've seen, so I watch a lot of vlogs, because I'm bored. So I watch a lot of vlogs while doing stuff, and I'll see people who are like in Clubhouse rooms with like Elon Musk and like the head of Robinhood, and I just like I would be like I like there was no chance of unmuting in that room, like how, and so I think that's so similar to if a grad student wants to build a personal brand, how do they do that when they're like, well, why do I have, am I good? How am I going to say this? Okay. Am I like good enough to actually have my work out there? Am I good enough to be promoting it? Can I actually provide value in this space where there's so many like massive faculty and massive researchers that are like so much higher than me? Why should I have a voice in this?
Yeah, so good old imposter syndrome at work,
Yeah.
right? So my response to this is if you're a graduate student, you are learning about the world and you're contributing new learning to the world. And that is so cool, right? Like you are
Mhm.
working in a domain that is super specific, but also like super cool that you're doing that. And usually, our research is pretty siloed. We're kind of the only ones working on a project, or one of only a very few amount of people working on a specific project. So
Right.
it's really awesome. You need to tell others about it. You don't have to write a book, right? Like this doesn't have to be something that is like set in stone, right? That this
Mhm.
is your expert view on it. But a thread on, like, let's say an interesting insight from a paper that you just read as part of your literature review, or a
Right.
blog post on some computation or method that you're using in your work. Simply a photo from lab showing something cool that maybe you saw in the microscope, or in your test tubes, is anything like that is just kind of awesome ways to share your research and contribute to your personal brand and getting across interesting stuff about your research. I think people want to know more about research, right? They want to know
Right.
what's going on in the laboratory and what's going on behind, maybe those like closed doors of science. And so I think it's a cool way to get out there and share your brand. And, don't worry so much about like, that there's all these like, professors that are doing all of this crazy
Mhm.
stuff, because you have really cool stuff. You have a lot of value to add to the conversation. So that would be my response, is like, don't let imposter syndrome get the better of you, and start small, start doing just little things,
Mhm.
and getting a conversation going. Like the most weird things go viral, right? Like
Right.
random things
Yes.
about like what your favorite Girl Scout cookie is. That goes viral, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, you're contributing a lot to the world, and you should share your research, get it out there. You never know where it might end up and who might see it.
Yeah, and I think, kind of talking about that, like when I think of like different like fields or stuff like that, like the people who start coming to my mind are Twitter people. Like people I've never really read their papers, but like they share stuff, and like, I know like Devin the chemist is on Twitter, and she's an analytical chemist, and like I know about her research because it's like fairly similar to like my own research, but like there's no way I would have ever searched for her papers, but like now I know about her. So that's kind of like from like the audience perspective of like, yeah, it actually does work. Cause like, I know all these people, like I know physicists and astrophysicists, and like, I would never search for their work. Like I would never find it, but like, I'm like, oh, cool. You published this really cool paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so cool. I mean, I just love that you're able to learn about all of these different scientific disciplines through this networking because, like in my very specific domain, I don't get to learn anything about space. But
Right.
by being on Twitter, I can see, some astrophysicist post about some cool space thing. And I'm like, that's so cool. I didn't even know that was happening today. So yeah, I think it diversifies your network and it helps you learn more science, which I mean,
Yeah.
we're all just a bunch of nerds, right? Like that's why we went into science. It's not because we care about one tiny specific thing. It's because we love all science or
Right.
most of science. And so, I think it's a great way to learn more information.
Yeah. And I think whenever you're talking about online, and I think especially this has been the case, more recently with things like Facebook and Twitter, and how do you, one, like protect your own privacy whenever you're online, but then two, what do you not share to like protect future jobs or maybe your current job or stuff like that? So kind of what are those two lines and how do you navigate them in the online space?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, this kind of, brings me back to like as a teenager, I wasn't allowed to get, a social media until I was in high school, right?
Yeah.
Because like everything you post online is permanent. And so, at the time it was like all sounded ridiculous when you were in high school. But now it's like, yeah, everything is permanent, right? All of those
Yeah.
pictures stupid pictures, you post in high school are still there, right? You can't get rid of it. But I think what I would recommend is not posting anything that you wouldn't want a future employer to see, your grandma to see, or your PI to see. Um,
Yeah.
it's the internet and stuff sticks. And so I think it's a good rule of thumb that if you're not comfortable sharing it with, everyone, then don't share it on your public facing profiles. I would
Okay.
recommend making your personal accounts private. Like if you have a personal Facebook, a personal Instagram,
Right.
make those private so that you can, basically if somebody follows you that you don't know, you can make the determination of whether or not they can follow you.
Right.
So, for example, I have the professional Instagram that I don't use very often that is public. And then I also have a separate Instagram for my personal life that is set to private.
Okay.
So I would recommend doing that and just kind of separating that personal brand that you're, for future employers and for research and for getting your name out there is separate from your, more private stuff that maybe is just like goofy pictures of you with your friends, right? I think it's
Right.
important to kind of separate those when thinking about this personal branding. And I'm not saying you should be a robot online, right?
Right.
It just means to carefully consider what you want your personal brand to be and make sure that everything you post aligns with that brand on all of those public facing accounts. So, I mean, like personally, I post my art and my crocheting and ultra running on my professional Twitter. But those
Right.
are things that I don't mind everyone and their mother knowing about, right? So I think that distinction is important. Share what you feel comfortable sharing, but know that everybody can see it on your public
Yeah.
accounts and make anything, any accounts that you want to be more private, just make those private and then vet people who, might want to follow you on those accounts.
Yeah, and I I'm just curious of your opinion on this. I don't know if you've like deeply thought about it, but I know there's like some topics, especially in like academic Twitter,
Mhm.
that's like shouldn't really be controversial, but like some people, and so like one of the things that comes to mind is like academic mental health.
Mhm.
And like some people find that a controversial topic. And the fact that we have to have activists for academic mental health is just a little
Crazy.
ridiculous. But it's like things when you're getting kind of that on that shaky ground, like do you share your feelings on that and share things like that when you know maybe a future employer doesn't want to support your academic mental health? But then again, do you want to be with a future employer? So just kind of like, I know like I have thoughts about that, but like, what are your thoughts in getting into those like more gray areas where they're not necessarily wrong or things that you shouldn't share, but they're things that you could be retaliated upon?
Yeah, I think it's very personal. I think for me, that I don't want to work for a company that would look down upon somebody sharing things about their mental health on Twitter, right? So
Right.
I wouldn't want to even be a part of a company like that. So, that I feel like I give myself more freedom than to do that. I think everyone's in a different scenario, and they can kind of make their own decisions, but it is something to think about really carefully. For me personally, like I will post things that, I feel are very important to me, and things that a future employer, I wouldn't want to work for them if they didn't, uphold certain values that I strongly
Right.
believe in, right? And those aren't really, they shouldn't be controversial, right? I mean, I
Right.
don't understand why certain things are controversial, but I wouldn't necessarily want to work for a company that didn't uphold certain values that I would potentially post about on Twitter. So I think that is, one component of this is I think everybody kind of needs to make that personal decision for themselves. I will say I would not be um, negative towards a specific person on Twitter,
Yeah.
right? Like, if let's say you have a bad PI, I might not like go out and say that on Twitter because it could come back to bite you
Yeah.
later on, even, it is what it is. There's a weird power dynamic in academia in general. So I think I just be careful about naming specific people or
Right.
insinuating that it is a particular person. But I think you should, be careful of that online in general, of, defaming people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's something to just be conscientious of, and whether that's, aligned with, what you strongly believe in, and just, making sure that you're thinking about that carefully if you are going to make negative comments about somebody specific.
Yeah. And I
That
think
was a very long answer and kind of
no, I
rambly.
think it's all like good things to think about, because it can be so easy to get into this kind of thought of, oh, these people are like supportive, I can say whatever, like I can air my grievances, but those things can come back to bite you, especially, when I first created a Twitter that was supposed to be for my business, and the very first person who followed me was my previous PI. And so I actually deleted that Twitter and like started up a whole nother Twitter, and like had to like quickly go into the settings so that no one could find me, because like, and not that I was there to say anything bad, like that wasn't my purpose. It was just
Right.
like I didn't want people to know I was starting this business.
Mhm.
But like things like that you need to consider, because I guarantee you there is someone who knows your PI on Twitter. If
Yes.
it's not like, and those threads can be easily found.
Mhm.
And so you do want to be careful about what you're sharing, even if you're not naming a name. You don't want to be like, well, my PI was such a jerk today, like this is what they said. Like, if you want to talk about those things, you want to be more general and being like, PIs realize that your students are struggling right now, like things like that, instead of,
Mhm.
having like going after someone, even if they're unnamed, like that identity isn't protected, and it can come back on you, because even though you can have those feelings, it's not necessarily the right place to share it on Twitter.
Yeah, 100% agree with you.
Yeah. And so kind of like for those who are interested, what are the like tips and resources that you have or that you know of for people who are interested in creating personal brands?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I sent you a link. I actually put together a website page specifically for this podcast, and it's at runsdata.org/personal branding resource. And so I posted some resources on there already, some like examples of different types of websites from PhD students and postdocs. I also have some examples of portfolios, so teaching portfolios, design portfolios on there. Have some just more general resources about blogging and getting started with Medium if you're interested in doing that. And we'll be adding more resources to that. So I have like basically a bunch of Twitter threads bookmarked with all of these different resources. And so I'm just going to
Okay.
link them all on that web page. And if you have any stuff too, Elena, that you want me to put on that web page, just shoot me a message and I could add
Yeah.
some links on there. But if people are interested, they can just go to that web page, and there should be a bunch of different, ideas and examples that they can kind of go through. I'd say, going through examples is probably the best way to go about, getting a good feel for how other people have presented their personal brand, because it's different among different domains, different scientific disciplines,
Right.
and where you are in the field, right? Like as a starting PhD student, your brand might look a little bit different than it will at the end of your PhD program, or
Right.
if you're going, you're an assistant faculty. So I think those are all, good things to think about. And hopefully you'll find some good information on that link that will give you some resources to then go out and, create your personal brand. Because as we've talked about today, I think, it's becoming more and more important for graduate students to have an online presence for a multitude of reasons. And a lot of them are personally beneficial, right? It is
Yeah.
benefiting you a lot to have a personal brand and to start networking and getting your name associated with your particular field out there.
Yeah, and I will have that link down below if you're interested, so you can click on it. And I guess one more question that I have that I kind of thought about was, when you think about like personal brands, there's if you actually like successfully grow a personal brand, there's usually navigations towards monetizing that personal brand. I don't know how much like you've thought about this, but what like comes to mind is like when you say writing on Medium, like that's a very like, I don't, if you don't know, you can write on Medium and you can actually get paid for your writings depending on who views your writings. And so what are your thoughts in someone with a scientific personal brand monetizing that brand in the future?
I mean, as a graduate student, any small money you can get, I would
Yeah.
say, go for it. In terms of, for me on Medium, I started out with the goal of, so it costs, you don't have to pay for a Medium account in order to write blogs on Medium. I will
Right.
preface this. For me, I was always reading Medium blogs. And so I would pay the $5 a month to get access to every blog on Medium. And so
Mhm.
my goal originally when I started blogging on Medium was to be able to cover that $5 every month. So I would come
Yeah.
out, a net zero from Medium. And that was basically my goal. So I didn't have any goals of like getting extreme wealth from Medium. And I
Right.
certainly am not anywhere close to that. Right. I am in a very niche area, right, of like data science and machine learning with
But
like,
that's actually a really big area of Medium.
yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff out there on Medium in data science and machine learning, which is super cool, and across a lot of scientific disciplines, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff on Medium, and you can learn a lot. And I think methods wise, if you're definitely a computational person and you aren't going on Medium to learn some computations, like get a Medium, because you will actually learn a lot from it. And I know I learned a lot from, reading Medium blogs. And so part of the
Mhm.
reason I wanted to do it was because, oh, well, I've, created stuff now that I think would be really valuable to the community. So let me add to it here
Right.
on a blog on Medium. In terms of going back to the original question, though, in terms of monetizing, I think um, think carefully about how it affects your personal brand. Obviously, like with Medium, it doesn't really affect your personal brand at all, right? Like
Right.
you can share a friend link so people can
Mhm.
access your article without having to pay for it. So
Yep.
usually on Twitter, I put the friend link. So anybody that goes on my blogs from Twitter, they don't have to pay anything unless they're already a Medium member. And
Right.
then, like I get like 2 cents for it or something. But,
Yeah.
like if you're thinking about monetizing in terms of advertising, on your website or something, if your website goes viral and you're thinking about advertising, just think carefully how that looks for your particular brand, right? Because if you're, scrolling through and you see a brand for carpet cleaner on your website that's about astrophysics,
Hmm.
it might not be as I don't know. It might not be as worth it in terms of creating that personal brand. So I would think
Yeah.
carefully about it, but I definitely don't think it's a negative to earn a little bit of extra money as a graduate student.
Yeah, and I think, that was something that I kind of like wish I had got into earlier, in like being, especially in like Medium, because I'm really in like my second or third month of like taking Medium seriously, and I'm like making, nice-ish money. Like I wish I had that as a grad student, right? And so I think, well, that's probably not, you're right, because there's different ways of, I guess, technically monetizing, where like if you're using your brand to get a job, like that's, you're monetizing your brand through the
Mhm.
income you're going to get in your future. And I think when
Exactly.
you create a business, there's always the kind of teetering of what's the best way to monetize. Like, yeah, I can put, ads all over my blog and make like 3 cents per page person comes, or I can, try and develop a relationship with the reader and then potentially
Mhm.
make more later on. That's really
Exactly.
benefiting both me and, the person reading my blog. So it's always, don't, if you create, your personal website, you shouldn't go and be like, now I'm going to go get Google AdSense to like that's not really the thought. Is you want to, develop a network first, and then there are
Mhm.
potentials for monetization in the future, whether that's through new jobs or even like freelancing opportunities if you decide to go that route, or through kind of something like you said, like sponsored post or things like that. But you need to
Mhm.
make sure that it's consistent with your brand and that you're really wanting to share that, because that's going to come back on you. Like if people go out and buy those things and they hate it, like they're going to lose trust in you. And so
Exactly.
needing to walk that line the whole time.
For
I'm just
sure.
curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
So, will you share with everyone where they can find you, all your different kind of, or your main places, I guess I'll say, your main places of your brand, since we're talking about personal branding, so that they can connect with you afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the one place you can find it all is at runsdata.org. That will have links to everything. But you can also find me on Twitter at runsdata. You can find me on Instagram at runsdata, although, like I said, I don't post there very much. If you have a clubhouse, you can find me there also at runsdata. And of course, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, it's just my name, Brinnae Bent. But all of that is also available on my website and with easy to click buttons. So
Yay.
you should be able
And
to find me.
yeah, and it'll also be available below as well, in the description. Um,
Perfect. Yeah, and feel free to add me, and then you at least have one connection to get started with your personal brand.
yes.
And yeah, so everybody here should now start out with at least one connection on any of those platforms. So you're already getting started.
Yeah, and then if you want another connection, I'm at Sci Grad Coach, so SCI Grad Coach, and you feel free to add me if y'all make Twitters or anything like that. I will definitely follow you back. I love following people back, mainly because I like it to get followed back. So I'm like, pay it forward.
Yes. Yes.
So I want to thank you so much for coming and talking about this. I think this is really helpful and things that I wish I would have known, 5 years ago when I started my PhD. So I want to thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Elena. It was so awesome being a part of it today. And feel free, everyone, to reach out with any questions. And Elena, make sure to send me an email so I can get you set up with Clubhouse so you can try it out. I'm so excited to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. And I want to thank all of you for listening today. And I will see you again in the next episode of the Stems of Grad School.